What's worse than cocaine being found in the White House? In our view, it's the rapidly deteriorating public perception of justice in America. It's a pretty high-minded ideal, and it doesn't seem to be weathering the abomination that is Hunter Biden's special treatment. An astounding 67% of U.S. likely voters think it's at least somewhat likely that Hunter Biden received favorable treatment from federal prosecutors because his father is the president. 49% of voters say very likely, 28% say not likely, and only 13% of them say not at all likely. That 67% is an incredibly damning number, and it does indeed set records as the highest percent of U.S. likely voters that think something nefarious is happening with the Bidens. This could probably be considered the previous record setter, where 63% of voters think it's at least somewhat likely that Joe Biden himself personally profited from a pay-to-play scheme with foreign governments. But wait till you see the demographic numbers for today's question. Even groups that are typical Democrat voters think that federal prosecutors are covering for Joe Biden by protecting his son. Here's age, and although 18 to 39-year-olds say very likely by smaller margins than others, more of them, 73%, say it's at least somewhat likely that Hunter got special treatment. Only 21% of them say not likely. For a group that leans more to the left and often seems more naive or trusting of public officials, that's a pretty important signal. But a majority of black voters also say it's likely that Hunter got special treatment. 56% of them, 37% of whom say very likely, and 37% also say not likely. But here's party, and half of Democrats think Hunter is getting special treatment. Only 43% of Democrats say no, and only 23% of them say it's not at all likely. Of course, 84% of Republicans say it's likely, 71% of whom say very likely, and only 6% say not at all likely. But look at independents. By a 68% to 26% margin, independents say Hunter Biden got special treatment. But here's what voters think about Hunter Biden's plea deal. President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, recently agreed to plead guilty on charges that he violated federal tax and gun laws. Under the plea agreement, Hunter Biden will not have to serve any time in prison. Do you approve or disapprove of his plea agreement? 37% of likely voters approve of the plea deal, 19% of whom strongly approve, but 55% disapprove, 41% strongly. These are massive numbers despite the fact that there's a few pretty strong mitigating factors. First, some voters here are going to support the plea deal because it has Hunter Biden pleading guilty to at least something. Second, a lot of our poll respondents probably aren't exactly aware of what's going on with his plea deal and are learning from the question on the fly. And third, Americans in general just like approving more than they like disapproving. 63% of Democrats approve of the plea deal and only 27% disapprove, but 78% of Republicans and 63% of independents disapprove of the plea deal. 45% of independents strongly disapprove and only 12% strongly approve. The independent numbers are increasingly looking horrible for Joe Biden. Despite recent news about Joe Biden's bribes, his son Hunter's dalliances, and what voters increasingly perceive to be a two-tier justice system, Joe Biden's had pretty resilient job performance numbers among Democrats. His numbers as of June were 75%, and 46% of Democrats strongly approved of Joe Biden's job performance. But among independents, Joe Biden only has a 36% job approval rating. 61% of independents disapprove of the job he's doing. And independent strong disapprovers outnumber strong approvers by a 3-to-1 margin. So Joe Biden still might be doing great among Democrats, but this corruption is definitely hitting home with independents in a way that Joe Biden didn't have to deal with in 2020. Here are opinions about the plea deal by the ever-interesting Biden approval numbers. 93% of Joe Biden's strong approvers approve of the plea deal, 64% strongly, but 93% of Biden's strong disapprovers disapprove of the plea deal, and a laughable 86% of them strongly disapprove. Insanely divided, but check out the somewhats. They really don't know what's going on, but it's fascinating to see that only 11% of Biden's somewhat approvers also strongly approve of the plea deal. And although the Biden somewhat disapprovers are absolutely not in favor of the plea deal, very few of them will muster the courage to strongly disapprove of the deal. But for more interesting results, here are opinions about the plea deal by income. And approval of the plea deal is very much a rich voter thing, showing a pretty stunning correlation between financial elitism and support for what appears to be, on its surface, a situation where a member of the elite is skating on some pretty horrible stuff, things that other people have done a lot of time for. Now, maybe that's a pretty risque thing for an independent pollster to say. You know, that Hunter Biden's plea deal is a clear example of a two-tier justice system. Well, we don't think it is, because we back up everything we say with numbers, and 58% of voters agree that there is a two-tier system in America. If you're the president's leading political opponent, the Department of Justice tries to literally put you in jail and give you prison time. But if you're the president's son, you get a sweetheart deal. 42% of voters strongly agree, and only 1/4 of voters strongly disagree. So by a 58% to 35% margin, voters agree with Republican Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy that we have a two-tier system of justice in America, one that is currently politically prosecuting Donald Trump. And of course Republicans agree, 77% of them, 64% of whom strongly agree, but 59% of independents also agree, and only 1/3 of them disagree. But 37% of Democrats agree with this, and only a slim majority, 53%, disagree, 39% of whom disagree strongly. Now, as I said, Joe Biden's job approval rating among Democrats has been incredibly resilient. Believe it or not, as of last month, he sits only 8 points lower than he did on the very first month of his term. And that's probably one of the most astounding public opinion facts you're ever going to hear. But here's a hard truth for Joe Biden. His approval rating has no doubt been held up, at least in part, by extreme Democrat Party loyalty, something which might not stick around if viable Democrat opponents materialize. With everything new coming out about Joe Biden, will something break? I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you think it might be. Or will Trump prosecutions continue to galvanize Democrats? Post your theories in the YouTube comments. And while you're there, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, follow us on Twitter, and thanks for watching.